Great. Well, I'll say hello quickly first. It's really nice to see everyone, but particularly the Jubilee Quartet. And I believe today we're going to begin our discussions of the amazing Schubert G major quartet. Correct me if I'm wrong with that. I think that's what we're embarking on. And for those of you who weren't with us last year when we did a lot of we had a lot of discussions about Bartók 4, and it turned out to be a quite interesting experience to do all of this without instruments and actually have a sort of a different approach to thinking about how we go about studying string quartet. And I think, Jubilees, if you want to comment on this, but I think you said that actually then when you came together to work on these pieces with your instruments, that actually the kind of intensive score study, communal score study, was actually something that benefited you massively and probably was something that you wouldn't have done. I'm really grasping for positives in these funny times, but actually that was something that you really was a new and kind of wonderful experience.
Yes, absolutely. It's something, as you said, that's something that we probably wouldn't have enough time as we would wish for under normal circumstances. So having done the analysis first was definitely a great approach and something we want to keep doing in the future once the pandemic is gone.
That sounds great. So shall we begin with this this little thing?
What edition is that?
This is just the Bärenreiter.
Okay.
Is that what, are you using that, or are you using the Henley, or?
We have this Bärenreiter, the blue one.
That's great. I think they just like changing their colours.
I see.
This is quite old, this score, but I think it's the same. I presume it's the same edition. I know the Henley is quite different, but so if we're using the Bärenreiter, that simplifies things. I mean, who knows who's right or wrong? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But consistency is helpful in these discussions. So guys, have you played any of this yet, or is this literally completely coming from the score?
Yeah,
perspective?
From the score.
Great. Well, let's begin. I should also just ask: how much are we trying to get through today? Because I know we're meeting again next Sunday as well. But what do you? How much do you want to do?
Maybe 2
As much,
or as much as possible.
Okay, so is the aim? Sorry, it's an admin question, but is the aim to get through the whole piece today and next Sunday? Is that the initial aim? Richard, do you know, is that the plan, or are we trying to do more sessions?
It's completely up to you and the Jubilees. Okay,
because that seems rather ambitious to get through a piece that takes an hour in 3 hours of an hour to play in 3 hours of chats. But let's begin, and we probably will we'll make progress. So let's just start and ask you for what is your impression of this piece? What, like, before opening the pages, what does it sort of say to you, or what?
Before thinking about looking at the score.
Well, I mean, you can open the score, but what does this piece come with? Any baggage? Any kind of does it come with any issues that you instantly are aware of, or are you scared of, or kind of weighed down by, or?
Well, I think we have different experiences here within the quartet.
Okay.
We have got different amount of having listened to it or not. So, like, I think, for example, Julia has heard it so many more times than I ever have. And I think I've maybe heard it once or twice live.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. And I haven't really listened to many recordings. So when I look at the score, I feel like I'm really approaching a new piece. But I think other guys probably have more memories because they have listened to it so many more times.
Okay. That all sounds good. So let's talk about some like big stuff first. I mean, this piece is enormous, and when it was written, it probably was I'm pretty sure it's the longest piece written for quartet, and kind of still probably is, apart from some like odd things that take like a day or something. But it's so I think that's one of the big challenges of the piece to start off with, is its magnitude, and so therefore that asks of us a great kind of feeling of how do we pace the work? How do we, when we're so used to playing like an 8-minute long first movement, which includes repeats, how do we suddenly sit down and tackle a movement that takes at least 20 minutes? And that's just the first movement. And I think that's one big challenge, just to put sort of on our wall chart. And then also just like emotionally, what are we dealing with in this piece? That's always going to be a very personal question, and that is something probably that is harder to do with when away from our instruments, because that is something that we kind of need sound to kind of get our hearts going. But if we just open the score and just look at even just the first line, this is quite or the first line, let's say up to bar 15. This is quite a bold and drama-filled beginning. Do you guys want to tell me what are give me sort of 2 or 3 things that strike you straight away? And Julia, if you're the listening expert to this, you probably already have kind of an answer, so just far away.
Okay. I mean, the initial thing that strikes me is this kind of like shining G major opening that we have. That's like the cello quintet a little bit.
Yeah.
And then shockingly, we're in minor, even though the quartet is named in major.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the similarities are very striking, aren't they? Of and what is I mean, the cello quintet does it, but just slightly differently. That it starts in the major and does a phrase, and then it does a phrase in the minor. And this is kind of this quartet is kind of getting major and minor going a bit more sort of on top of each other. And so we have this G major, G minor thing first, and then he does it again in the dominant, just because why not? And then we end on this pause on a dominant question, and then proceed in the tonic. So it's like harmonically, from that perspective, it's not yet particularly radical. I mean, it's just setting out our foundations, or our pillars, I suppose. What else strikes you about it?
I'm noticing that there is so much information already in the first 15 bars, like dynamics and articulation. It is very dense already.
Yeah, completely. So we have, as you say, I mean, we have piano, forte, fortissimo, and pianissimo. It is quite a lot, isn't it? Sort of unusual amount of information to have at the beginning of a piece. We also have long notes. We also have very short notes in this sort of dotted rhythm. So it's setting up kind of sustained and dotted short stuff. I mean, these sound like obvious things to say, but as you all know, we do need to always remind ourselves of the most obvious things, because those are the things that we always forget. So like Schubert is like massively putting on the page here motives. And because so much of this first movement is all just about motivic stuff, there's kind of not that much music in a kind of standard musical way in this movement. You could argue that there is almost even not really a tune. It's just a lot of motifs that are put together, and the sort of the landscape of the countryside is what makes it remarkable, and also the way that he basically has said everything by bar 15 motivically, and it doesn't really, like, nothing else doesn't really add to it. There's variation that comes later, but basically everything that he needs, he's got there, which is interesting. However, that doesn't help us play it. I'll just maybe give you a few. I mean, it's tricky this, because I don't want to just tell you how to play it, because that's just how I do it, which has a validity, but I also want you to make up your own decisions. So maybe I will sort of give you a few little hints, and then when we finally get to see each other for real, we can then consider what you actually offer up with it. I think that just going back to the big issue, which in what I said about the size of the piece, but the main sort of question throughout the piece, as we've kind of pretty much touched on, is a major minor battle. That's kind of all this is about. And as we all know, Schubert is the master of doing stuff with the simplicity of major minor, and his complexity, emotional complexity of how we feel when we're in each of those tonalities is the kind of thing that is endlessly fascinating. Julia, you already spoke about the kind of shininess of the opening G major chord. I think that is a very, very good place to start when you approach this. I'd like to point out that it starts piano, not pianissimo. There's a sense that you kind of want this to creep in, but actually it doesn't write for it to creep in. And actually there's the kind of clarity of just a chord starting. And that doesn't mean that it's in the foreground necessarily. But I think the way that you do these first two bars, because of the weirdness of the markings as well, with this hairpin throughout the two bars, and then the second bar has a crescendo. I mean, like, what does that mean? That's like quite weird, isn't it? If we consider that is a bit of a challenge. I mean, I personally feel that our relationship to this chord changes the longer it is there, because it begins and we all could sort of feel that we're in a very innocent place, but somehow the longer it stays there, the more kind of obsessed it gets about being, first of all, just sound, but also obsessed with about where it's about to go to. And I sort of feel like you could think that the first bar is just establishing it, and then the second bar with the crescendo suddenly sort of takes hold of it and morphs it into this enormous minor chord at the beginning of the third bar. So there's an emotional experience that needs to happen in that beginning. And actually, the stronger and more potent the emotional response to that is, the easier it is to play it together. Because if you just sit there kind of waiting for each other, it's not gonna happen. Remarkable also your shiny remark emphasizes this, but the fact that the cello doesn't feature until the very end of the second, which is kind of also adds an innocence to it. And then this chord, which has like quite a lot of notes. I mean, 4, 7, 10, 11 notes going on in the second bar and the third bar. That's quite a change from the 3 that we have at the beginning. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that will help you. I think it's also interesting to note that there's forte on the last 8th note of the second bar, and then fortissimo. I really think that it kind of does it itself, because it's only 4 notes and then 11 notes. But I think that you could think that you don't need to have crescendoed to your maximum dynamic. We have 3 Fs later on, so maybe fortissimo isn't the loudest thing you do, but it's not going to be quiet, is it? At least. Yeah, so there are a few things to think about at the beginning. the modulation to the dominant that happens in the fourth bar, I mean, the move to it's not a modulation yet, it's a move. I think it's important that you're not too angry with the sound. This is all very kind of like declamatory, stating our tonal areas, and sort of, I don't think there's too much, necessarily too much kind of angst drama going on. And we get to the dominant, which, yeah, the dominant has to be a major chord in the minor key. I mean, that's just how it has to be, but still is a major chord. So maybe you can think about a positivity of sound in the middle of bar 4. Then we have this little echo. Technically speaking, when we first learned this piece, we did have a lesson just on the first 4 bars for about 4 hours. So that's something you can look forward to at some point. Because so much of this, so much of the impact of this piece comes from an utter perfection in your right arms, so that things are, so we're unaware of any sort of human deficiencies going on in the performance of it. Obviously, it's nice that things are together and in tune, but not the be all and end all. But I think in stuff like this, it's a real test for the quality of your quartet instrument, and the more brilliant and slick that it can be, the sort of then allows us to make a musical point with it. But this beginning is quite challenging for that, but it's just about matching the bows, and you know how to do that kind of stuff. So we'll work at that as and when. Yeah. So then we have this the one in the dominant, which probably needs to be a little bit different to the opening one. That you can decide how that happens, but maybe if we just look register wise, bar 3 versus bar 8. Bar 8 is a lot wider, like Toby's lower, Teresa's higher, and there's one more note, I think. Yeah, Lorraine has got one more note. So perhaps the second one is even more this kind of like, I mean, I know I said it shouldn't be too angsty or angry this beginning, but there is definitely a horror that emotionally from these kind of the purity of the major high up, almost slightly kind of religious or heavenly or something like that, and then the horror of these minor chords, I think, is something you definitely need to like consider, at least throw into the mix. Then we have this amazing contrast of the pianissimo 11 and 12, 13, 14. That is again something you need to work out how kind of connected to the beginning that is, or how broken it is. There's kind of lots of options, lots of ways of doing it. Before going on after the pause, tempo is quite a tricky thing in this movement. I would maybe suggest when you start off that you don't worry too much about necessarily playing it all at the same speed, and maybe try and see how everything takes its own place. And I mean, you don't want things to sound different tempi, but yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I've definitely been through journeys on this piece where, like, the dotted rhythm in bar 3 has been loads faster than when we get to bar 16. So, and I didn't get in too much trouble for that. So,
I was actually really surprised when I saw that was the rhythm.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a lot slower than
that. Yeah. Well, maybe that's an interesting place to start for yourselves, that actually you try and make those more accurate. Teresa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, literally before this session, I was sitting here looking at this, just the opening in the score, and I texted Julia saying, more I'm looking at it, the slower I can hear in my head bar 15 onwards. And like I don't, it's just I have no like other foundation, it's not like because I haven't listened to many recordings, but we talked about before when we did our little analysis online that I was like, I'm really surprised that this is what it is, because when I listen to people play, it usually sounds like so slow.
Yeah. What from 15 sounds really slow.
Yes, but
yeah.
And like first, my first instinct was like, well, why should it be so much slower? But now that it's like I'm sitting on it, I suddenly am feeling like kind of understand.
For me, just jumping ahead a tiny bit, the piece only really begins when we get to bar 33. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we should feel too kind of straitjacketed tempo-wise until we get there. I think definitely 33 up to 63 should be pretty much in a tempo, right?
Yeah.
And that should probably continue through most of the rest of the movement. So, I mean, this is clearly an introduction, although definitely not lightweight. But yeah, so that like stuff to think about, but experiment with it. I mean, I think we obviously need the beginning. It needs to have enough heft and weight to make a point, and the sort of declamatory nature of a dotted rhythm ba-dim, ba-da-da-dum, has a kind of place in that context. But then what you have then at 15 is so different that I think if you just try and make it the same speed as a starting point, then that's maybe a shame emotionally for your exploration of that. But it's good to remember, because it's easy to forget that it is the same rhythm. Okay, let's also just a tiny thing. Bar 10's piano and 11 is pianissimo. I think it's quite good to remember always that like bar 10 and bar 5 that they can be very scary. I'm glad I've never had to play them. But they, I don't actually. It's great, Toby, being a cellist at the beginning of this piece, because we really have none of the issues. Like, it's great. Yeah. It's so nice. Yeah. Yeah, we just make it sound better when we come in. We don't have any of the pain to get there. Yeah, but so you other three, that you don't need to be too quiet on those. Ba-bum, just execute them well. Okay, let's go to bar 15. What do you make of all of this stuff?
We discussed the interval of the fourth in Therese's part.
The falling fourth.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to take over, Therese.
Oh, it's just so delicate, and
to me it sounds heavenly.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, but I think this plagal idea of the falling fourth cadences continuing along gives it this very intimate but almost kind of tentative, well, not tentative, but sort of unsure feeling, and yet something that's quite nurtured. I don't know, it's quite confusing in terms of emotionally what it's saying.
Yeah.
But there's something special about it.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's one of the most remarkable things anyone's ever written, and where it happens after what we've just had is utterly sort of heartbreakingly fragile, and these like utterances that are just incomplete. And even Teresa, when you from 20, when it's something continues,
and bar 22 is just so nice.
Yeah, it is so nice. Is kind of it's this. I'd say it's classic Schubert. Obviously, it's classic Schubert, but it's this this fragility and vulnerability, and but yet still hopeful and still yearning for some good somehow. this effort to rise, which he never can really fulfill, but he just tries to rise. And as you say, 22, when he manages to get up to that G, and then just briefly, but also this tremolo thing from the lower three. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, when I first heard this piece, I definitely, and I still am not in a position to say I know the whole repertoire, but it's kind of like uncanny and massively unusual, and I almost don't really know if that had happened before, like that this kind of texture. I think it is basically completely new. Do say if I'm completely wrong, but I think that basically idea of a tremolo in quartet is kind of pretty novel. But that also just what that emotionally creates, this feeling of otherworldliness and distance, and I think it's pretty extraordinary. Be careful that you can still hear the chords. I mean, there's a danger to play this too quietly, which I definitely have fallen into, and it's not the end of the world. But it is important that we still hear the harmony here, and it's a very simple harmony. Also, phrase structurally, it's not that it's not that sort of wild what's going on, but it's nice just to note that it's a short, long phrase thing going on. But the long bit of it is like arguably 5 bars. If it's 2 + 2 + 5, which is kind of, we don't really need to necessarily do anything to show that, but just nice to notice it. What I think is also nice here to realize is that the harmonically, the bass line is just a descending, like, chromatic scale, basically, sort of most of the way it's a chromatic scale. And how that's then repeated, obviously the next, whatever it is, 9 bars. But then this descending bass lines is something that does become quite a strong feature. From 33, the same thing is happening. Different, like, kind of where it's written out is slightly different, but basically that we're still having the same bass line. So he's musically, nothing is going on. I mean, like, in a kind of trying to get anywhere, like, it's repetition, and yet somehow we don't feel like we're stuck, which is kind of remarkable. We encounter in bar 20 our first accent, which is obviously a bit of a wormhole. Like, this is like, what do these mean? Let's not worry too much about what they mean. Let's just notice that there's one there and that they're going to come and appear. But we did work on quartet sats together, didn't we? I think that was the only Schubert that we did so far. But we'll come to the accents a little bit later. Actually, almost now when we get to bar 33. Yeah, experiment with the speed of your tremolos. Experiment with whether you should all be doing the same speed of tremolo. I think it maybe is not necessarily the case that you all have to be doing the same speed of tremolo, depending on your register, depending on the voices, depending also on the color of the harmony. So you want to make the first and second bars different from the third and fourth bars of it, at least subtly, and have a slightly different move. Let's wait to see what you do with it. Let's just talk about accents because they're about to feature. What do any of you want to say anything about accents?
Depends on the context.
Yeah,
completely. There's this big confusion in Schubert, just to say it, because it probably should be said, whether accents are accents or are they diminuendos, or nobody really knows, because he often wrote bigger accents than people would normally write. it's all quite boring because like we don't know, and they don't mean, it's not as simple as the meaning do a diminuendo or hit this note. And as with all these markings, it's always something slightly more subtle and slightly kind of floating in between those two kind of poles. Do any of you guys have an idea about how you might like to think about accents in here, as opposed to, because we do have like sforzandos and fortissimos and all these kind of things, and yeah.
So I suppose more leans rather than like like fast release kind of hit.
Yeah.
They're more like expressive note rather than sharp.
Yeah. Any other like ideas or suggestions?
They could be kind of like lifting. We could kind of help lift Therez's line, I think, depending on how we play them. Something that kind of moves the line along or feels like it pulls it back.
Yeah. I think particularly here, actually, in these ones in a more lyrical place, so like 20 or 22, I think they can often be even more powerful if they're anti-accents.
Mm-hmm.
So like you go to them as if you're gonna accent them, but then actually miss them, which I think is quite a classy emotional device. And so because the accent and an emphasis, you can imply an emphasis by just setting it up to be emphasized. So we give the feeling that we're going to go there, but then you just don't need to then accent hit it or whatever. Going forward from 33, I think you might like to consider generally in this movement that accents, or generally in Schubert, that accents as a starting point can be more phrase marks, like phrasing points rather than emphases. That definitely works and is kind of shown from 33 with the hairpins that grow to these accents. And I think later on, they do, like in the second subject area, definitely they work as phrasing marks. I mean, not places you need to like go to necessarily, but just giving you some sense of where the importance in the phrase is. We can get there, but just to throw that one in there. 33, does anyone have any character feelings here?
Massive. Just like
that's great. Yeah. For me, we're again dealing with like kind of sound. By the beginning is all about sound, basically. And here again, I think it's kind of waves of sound and just showing harmony and showing chords. So much of this movement is just being in a chord, being in a harmonic area, being in a, and sort of living with them and not feeling like you need to do much when you're in them, but just kind of presenting harmony. I think that's quite a good thing to think about. Also because it's so long. If you get sort of bogged down in like doing too much, then we actually it's sort of it's harder to pace the movement. We need to have variation again according to the harmony from 32. So each sort of 2-bar wave is probably going to have a slightly different color, slightly different feel to it. When we get to 43, things obviously get a bit closer. So he's like just quickening the harmonic rhythm. So the action, it's instead of being 2-bar groups, comes to 1-bar, and then things get even shorter and shorter until we get to 51. So like from 49, we're then just doing kind of, I know we're in one chord, but kind of just it's every beat is something's going on. That might help your journey through this. And then when we get to 51, we have 3 bars of repetition, so those need some sort of variation. And notice where the markings are here. They're all on the first beat. The yum ba dum. When we come back in the second half, in about 15 minutes time, the accented notes are the second note of the bar. The yum ba dum. Yeah, this stuff all just needs amazing sound and bow control. It's the danger with this is that it all sounds loud. So I would recommend that basically the only like strong places are where the accents are, and everything else apart from like around them are kind of more released, kind of open things. Also, we want to hear the battle between the top 2 and the bottom 2. Yeah.
John, can I ask you a question? Boring, like not necessarily a boring question, but a practical question about this bit.
Yeah.
And how you actually manage to prioritize things technically with the right arm in the section. Because for me, I'm seeing the crescendo in fortissimo with a slur over the bar line with an accent and I'm thinking there must be like I obviously want to keep that sound continuous and this wave feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But there must be somewhere where you have to kind of compromise a little bit, or which to show, and how to do that throughout the whole section without forcing or without cutting the slur or something. And it looks tricky to manage.
Yeah. So fortissimo, I think, applies to the whole passage. So once that's the kind of zone we're in. Doesn't mean that we need to be playing loud all the time. The main thing I focus on is getting to the accent. So I save the bow like massively at the beginning and then just whoosh through to the accent and release it straight away, so that the second bar I'm hardly playing much after the accent at all. And really after I establish the chord at the beginning of of 33, let it go straight away. So that then you have somewhere to grow from.
Okay.
I can show you. It's quite simple when I show you. But it's basically you have to act the whole passage. So it's all about creating like ups and downs, waves basically, and so really like don't feel like you need to be sustaining and making volume. Especially because it will be so impeccably in tune. There will be so much resonance going on that you just don't need to be playing loudly, because the resonance will help you there. I have to say that we do, every time we play this piece, which is quite a lot, and it sort of is always in our rep, but it's a kind of funny piece. Once you've learnt it, it's actually quite easy. Like it doesn't go from your body, but this is one of the places we always oil for intonation from 33. It's just like you can never do too much on it, just because it benefits so much from that the brilliance of the perfect resonance. Yeah, a lot of it is Julia, go for it.
Just one more question about the technical side. How strictly should we stick to the slurs?
Okay, so I think you can break them because you have to play for both teams.
Yeah.
I think that's what we do. But kind of pretend that you're not breaking them.
Yeah.
But I think the slurs are really actually very nice to do, especially if you're not trying to play it too loudly. You'll be, and the other that kind of stuff, that's going to be heard. So I think that can be more in a kind of release, kind of quite light kind of feeling. And when we get to 43, these bars that oscillate, you need to pick which was your more important bar and which is your release bar. You can choose. Like it's one way or the other, and I don't either's fine because they both have tensions of certain sorts, so you can work out what those mean to you. Yes. And then I would drop a tiny bit at the beginning of 49. Like subtly, unnoticeably, but just so you really have, and do that crescendo by increasing the amount of sound that you're making. So basically use more and more bow as you go through. And then from 51, those 3 bars, maybe just make 53 the biggest. Just in a kind of 1, 2, 3 kind of way. Now the next bit, we start to enjoy his use of the Kyle, the dagger, because we notice that the harmony changes on the dagger, which maybe tells us how to play it because we want to hear it rather than it being anything else. So maybe it's a stroke that is has substance to it, and the length of it maybe doesn't need to be short or long. That's kind of irrelevant. We just want to hear the harmony changing. So maybe that's a nice place to start. But with all of this, it's quite brass-like. I find it's not very stringy. It's all kind of that brilliance and shininess, and so maybe things do have fronts on them. Again, your shape will help you through all of this stuff. This is quite hard for intonation from 54. But it's just getting your perfects in tune, and and everyone has to be playing in tune themselves. Again, Toby is quite easy for us. The others have got like double stops and stuff. So that's how it is. Right. Crescendo only goes to forte, and then you have an extra crescendo beyond that to this fortissimo to the end, to our big F sharp major chord. Yeah, you just need to manage that basically. But let's notice quite how remarkable it is to be in a piece of music that's so clearly about G. For the first moment that we have to not be in G is in F sharp. Like, that's weird, not what we expect. So that's kind of remarkable. And what's even more remarkable is how instantly we slip out of it into the key that we should be in, namely D major for the second subject. Yeah. Also, this is our first moment of silence. These rests in 63 and 4. That's our first moment of silence for quite a long time. And what happens there is quite important. So once you come in at the end of 64, you need to manage how we're going to show how remarkable it is to slip back in to a normal sort of key area in the way you do that, the bum. So that needs to be thought about. And maybe,
Sorry to interrupt you. Just a question about, I know like in the context of the piece, F sharp major's weird, but does it sound weird as we think it might based on the progression that we've had before in the previous?
That's a good question. No, maybe it doesn't sound that weird, but it is still quite striking. I said that's impossible to answer that. Like, to some people it will sound completely normal. To some people it will be massively upsetting, and to 99.9% of the world they won't even care. So like, what do we? Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it is. Yeah, I suppose because we've gone through like a quite standard but quite rapid circle of fifths from 54, that it doesn't seem so remarkable that we get there. But maybe maybe it's more about what comes afterwards that makes us realize how remarkable that is.
Do you guys also think about, like, when you were rehearsing, how would you approach trying to make F sharp major sound, because it doesn't ring as well as, you know, G minor or D major? Is that part of it? Would you kind of embrace the like slightly constricted nature of it?
Yes, I suppose our instruments naturally will give that quite a different timbre to like a G major chord, for sure. And so actually we need to work harder to make a good chord sound, don't we? Yeah, we would consider that, I think. I suppose I don't know how consciously we would be doing that, but it is just quite hard to get that chord good, and yeah, in tune and ringing and everything. A lot of these chords, I suppose that's just a general chord question, like a lot of the chords in this piece, because they're like 3 or 4 noters, we have the question of how do we break them. And I think we've spoken about before that basically like 99% of the time we always should break from the beat. So no like breaking before the chord, just because for some reason in quartet it just sounds bad. If one person is breaking, it just doesn't work. Yeah, so all of these ba-dum, ba-ya. Yeah. Rather than ba-yum. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you make of the next bit of this second subject?
I wasn't really sure if it was the second subject, because it's so, there's not, I don't know, you expect a second subject to kind of have this like beautiful, sweet tune, and it's just so rhythmic. I mean, it obviously is the second subject when you look at the structure of the movement, but to look at it and to imagine how it sounds in my head, I don't feel hugely inspired. But obviously that's not.
No, I know. You're not criticizing the piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that just chimes into the what I said earlier about this, that this kind of movement doesn't have any tunes. Basically, it has some counter melodies, which are weird because they're counter melodies against nothing. So that those become the lyrical things, the counter melodies, which is just one of a myriad of remarkable things about the movement. Yeah, so Julia, that's good. Let's go from that as a starting point. So how would you think about playing this, therefore, if you don't have if there isn't a memorable tune to make the second subject a thing? How can we make the second subject a memorable area of the movement?
To me, it sounds much more organized than everything before. It sounds like there's a dance happening almost in the way the rhythm is written. So yeah, I don't know if that would certainly influence how I would play this in comparison to how I have played before.
Yeah. What's the big? I mean, the second subject. The main thing about the second subject is that it needs to contrast the first subject. I mean, so what do we focus on with that?
I think it's very horizontal.
Yeah.
And even though there are lots of dots and whatnot, I actually feel it very like brushed and just quite long, actually.
Mm-hmm.
There's also like this. Sorry, Julia.
No, you go.
It's like, for me, I think it's where we really now, because we're kind of playing the same motivic thing over and over again, but this time the transition between the major and minor harmonies again is quite condensed, and but it's like within a long phrase. So now instead of just going backwards and forwards between the same major minor, we're actually going on a more of a longer journey, but still through the same feeling of being in in a light space and a dark space.
Great. Yeah.
But more melodically, ironically, than before. So it's the same concept, but with a through line.
Yeah. Teresa?
I was just going to say, finally, we're doing something together.
Yeah.
Really together.
Yeah. I mean, the beginning is quite together. The opening 12 bars or whatever. That's quite sort of like a team, but discounting that, you're quite right. That's quite remarkable also about it is the unison rhythmic nature of it. The fact that it's all pretty much in like stepwise. There's none of this like big octave leaps, all this kind of bright sort of angular blocks that are going on earlier. The complete opposite to that. Also, like in the world that we're in, like we've been in such a kind of blazing, glorious, massive place, and I really feel here that we're kind of in a tiny little hut somewhere. You know, it's complete that scope, and I think those things are really useful to hang on to when you finally get to play it, because you need to be living in these worlds and remember the world that you're in, and not like sort of not confuse them. And that really will help your pacing of the piece. That like so like now we're in a little hut, so you can't do anything that you couldn't do that would be sort of breaking the walls down if you're in your hut. Harmonically, it's quite weird, isn't it? Because we basically are in D major, but we don't really ever touch D major until we get just to the very end of the phrase. That's quite odd as well. So there's something slightly unsettled about it, slightly traveling, like searching. Again, thinking about our accents, I think if again we think about them as slight phrase marks, I think it's quite nice because it takes us away from the downbeats. So there's always somewhere we're like going to this bit of the bar and then 1, 2, 3. And so it's always sort of not too four square, which again is a slight contrast to what we've had before. The hairpins as well, what do you think those mean?
Expressive.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting all the right answers. It's great. Yeah, did someone say something?
No.
No, okay. Let's leave that and see what happens when you get to it. Nice bit of bow vibrato stuff as well in 73. Yeah. Without wanting to give the actually no, it's not giving the game away completely. This is the first time that we get this material, obviously. If you look very carefully at the score, you will see that every time this passage is repeated, and it comes quite a lot in very different guises. The markings are never the same. There's always something slightly different. So even when we get to the next one, so into 78, can you see that the dots are now no longer there? Yeah, I mean that's the main difference. And some of the hairpins are taken out a little bit, I think, but mainly the dots. The big difference is the dots have gone. And then if we go even further, so the next time the tune comes is at 110. When the cello has it, so you see that's completely radically different, the way that he's writing the same music. We can just keep on looking at them, but I'll leave that to you a little bit. But they're all different, and some of them are more subtly different than others. But I think it's very, very worth investigating that a little bit and really not and taking the effort to make them sound different, like quite clearly different. Teresa?
Do you think it's because what's going on with the other voices? Do you think it has an impact, or that he was just trying to make sure that he basically balances the tune versus the other voice?
I think it's I don't I'm not sure. I don't think it necessarily matters.
Okay.
I think because the transformation this theme goes through is so extraordinary until we get to the very last one. I think it is. Let me find it, which is after in the 388. Yeah, so like by 393 we get like every different version of it is going on. So we've got the sustained thing that Toby has, we've got the pits is going on, we have the original thing. I'm working up obviously through the score, and then Teresa, you have the triplets that you just had where we got to. Yeah, which is kind of amazing that he combines all those different things, and you don't really notice it because it's so effortless, the whole thing. Yeah, that's just a general thing to like open your eyes when you get to those bits, because and think about how radical you can be. I shouldn't be too encouraging of that, because you might be a bit too radical. But I think it is absolutely fine to show the differences. So like I would suggest as a starting point trying it almost completely legato when you get to 78, and see how that sounds. I mean, not like weirdly legato, but like definitely not sort of in this almost like slightly light-hearted thing that we have at the first time we hear it.
It's like in Maiden, isn't it? This is like tunes and in everybody else's part but mine, and I have always like crazy stuff that no one actually listens to because the tune is somewhere else.
Yep. Let's also just be reveal a nasty truth that this, as Julia, you already basically said, so I can blame you if we get in trouble. But like the tune's not very great. Like it's pretty boring, and like I don't want to hear that tune however many times, 12 times. Like it's like that's just boring. So the interest is in the variation, and the beauty is in how you vary it and how the listener doesn't really realize you're varying it, because they're still fascinated by this tune even though it's not very good. in you know what I mean.
Yeah. Please,
nobody here go away and say that I'm slagging off Schubert, because I'm really not. But I think it's just good. It's always good with these things to acknowledge where the special thing is. And Schubert obviously intentionally, it's not like he can't write a good tune. We see that in like Beethoven and Haydn and all the stuff. That's not the point. It's not. The beauty is being created in a much more complicated and extraordinary way than just writing a nice tune. Right. Going on through, I think also every time you get to this passage, and we touched it slightly, but this idea that it's traveling is really important. It's never sedentary. We're always going somewhere and trying to explore something. There's a like from 78, Teresa, when you have all these triplets, that just encourages us to keep on going. So I think if it gets too fussy and too like stop-start, because of the accents mainly create that, then it becomes, it gets in the way. Right. Then we have this rather extreme crescendo in 89, from probably quieter than pianissimo to 3 Fs. So that's quite terrifying and quite shocking. And I think it's great if you really don't give any hint of that away. So the decrescendo before that, like we almost have completely faded to nothing, and then suddenly there's this like tsunami that just forces us into this D minor place. Interestingly, when we hit the 3 Fs, there are no like accenting marks. You might expect in a 3 Fs thing that there might be lots of sforzandos and stuff. Actually, there's nothing. Phrase structure is interesting. 5 bars, 3 plus 2. So I would suggest, even though it's like terrifyingly loud, that you work on your directions. So possibly throughout the first 3 bars, we want to get to that 3rd bar. Look where the kiles are. They're always on da dum be da dum ba dum. So I think those give us a sort of idea where we might want to phrase to. The danger with this passage is that we always hit the crotchet. Da dum ba dee dee da dum. But so really try and avoid that. I think I've got a clever bowing that makes that possible. So never do those crotchets on a down bow. So it's always sort of up, down, up, and then not accenting the next bar as well. If we take Julia's, just because you have the first kind of pure one. If you really go to your B flat, da dum ba dee da da dum, and then phrase away subtly, still within 3 Fs. So I would suggest bowing up, down, up, and then up, down, down, up. So you've only got a down bow on the first beat when there's a kyle, basically.
Yeah. Cool.
I mean, you do whatever you want, but that's quite, that makes it physically quite a nice feeling. So you're really just like going into that down bow, dee dee, but then releases to there. Teresa, you had your hand up.
I have a question about this triple F, my triplets.
Yeah.
So if these guys are going to just go through and not showing, you know, the syncopation, in my triplets, do I show da dee da dee dee dim ba dee 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 da da ba dee da dee?
I think that's a bit too complicated, maybe.
Just go through.
It's just so incredibly extreme that I think you can just be like flat out.
Okay.
And I think you all should phrase to that 3rd bar, because that's where it modulates. And then you can release into the 4th bar. So the 4th and 5th bar are a bit more just matter of fact. So you only have one place that you're going to in those 5 bars. And then it's repeated. And then we get to bar 100, which is fortissimo, not 3 Fs. But having said that, I don't think anyone wants this to feel like you're just sort of relaxing a bit. I think it's all, we've got to be emotionally intelligent about these dynamics as well. And I suppose the most important thing about this again is like what I was saying about these different worlds. So this is very like symphonic, orchestral kind of stuff, but it's all tutti. So it's not that important, but it's just kind of like we're out in the ocean and it's just a lot of stuff going on, but we don't need to get too, if it's too kind of fiddly, then I think it gets too important and then we're just overwhelmed with information. It's a general problem that this piece can suffer from. At least, I mean, it's such an enormous thing, but I think this first movement is actually quite matter of fact. I mean, full of matter of fact in a way that we then have somewhere to go having played it. I think for the journey in the piece, the real wild stuff is in the last movement. And if the first movement, I find a lot of it is just stating a lot of stuff, right? And like almost like we're watching the whole movement from behind a glass screen, something like that. And so you should end the first movement being obviously moved and amazed and all this kind of stuff by it, but not feel like you've been dragged through everything in the world. I think there is a certain, because of this, as we're like discovering this lack of material or lack of like tunes, there's something that, and yeah, and this obsessive use of just repeating rhythm and blocks of harmony, that there's something that we're still craving by the end of the movement. Yeah, we'll pop that on our somewhere and think about that. Where did we get to? Yeah, that 100. Just a boring technical thing. Really make sure when the people have deem badladum that you're really together with the other triplets. It's very easy for those not to be together. Again, it's just like harmony, and you guys do harmony. So if you didn't do harmony, this piece would be a bit of a non-starter. But it's, again, just like 102, 103 is just tensor harmony. So we need to go there, and then release away from that again. Yeah. So there's just this kind of like tension release stuff, both on the small scale and on the big scale, and it kind of plays itself once you start doing that, at least in these tutti sections. Right. 109. So again, the next sort of utterance of this second subject. Toby, what do you think about your stuff here?
It's, to me, it feels more suspended in time.
Yep.
Like it feels like it's lost a lot of its momentum suddenly. And yeah, it's a little bit kind of the pitch texture above it kind of makes it feel a little bit more. There's a little bit more magic in it. I don't know. I don't know. There's something that
it's like fairies.
Yeah, exactly. Something very very fantasy like, and just kind of it's almost like it's exploded and now we're just seeing the pixie dust kind of sprinkled, and it's kind of we don't know where we are.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. Just in how to play these tunes, we will allow ourselves to call them tunes for now, just for
yeah.
Why not? I really like to not have made too many decisions about what I'm going to do with them, and really like just experiencing the journey of the contour, and that just to try and give myself the space to be able for it to not be the same every time. And I get quite like sort of obsessed about what that can mean, that we go up 2 notes and then we come down and we go up a little bit and then we go up, we go down and up, and just this kind of fascination, get really fascinated with what's going on. So because I don't think it works if it just has like an atmosphere of a tune going on, because no one wants to hear this as a nice cello tune, or when the other ones are there as like a nice whatever tune. I think it's more just Schubert's clearly obsessed about which way to go, whether to go up or down, and it's so simple. But I think that every time I play this, I try and convince myself to try and experience that obsession with the contour. Yeah, I'll leave that with you. 122. So also just with the pitches, like again, just be fascinated with what the notes are doing. Are you going up? Are you going down? Are you staying put? How much are you going up? How much are you going down? All these really, really simple, basic things. But that's what brings it to life. If it's a bit sort of but, then it's like, and that's not to like try and actively decide. I think it's quite important with a lot of these things to not make too many decisions. Like both make loads of decisions, but then also don't think that they're set in stone, and just be like really fascinated by it. More like make lots of observations and see how that comes out. So because also when it's in pianissimo in Schubert, it's so private that if you've made a decision that's almost like too much, it's almost too, I don't want to hear what your decision is. It's too personal to tell anyone what you've decided to do. Yeah. Right, 122 is only forte, which is quite nice. Major, it's like less important. But again, just this tutti thing. Just let's get through it, and it's just sort of happening. And then obviously we get to an interesting place this time, back to our F sharp zone, and then off again in a different key. And you can see at 142 that he's added in a different thing. So that's all that's going to happen in this first half, basically, is he's going to have tune, pits, and triplets. So the counter melodies don't come until later on. Yeah. But so the tune this time at 142 for Lorena, you completely the opposite to Toby's tune, like the markings. You've got the dots and the accents again, whereas Toby was like slurred massively. So that in itself is, that's all. That's, I think if we just get fascinated in those markings, rather than in trying to do too much with it, then it kind of just works.
John.
Yeah. Yes.
Just talking about those markings. He only writes one Kyle.
In your one.
At the beginning, and is that significantly, is that important in terms of showing the beginning of the phrase? And does that mean that in the bar before I have more time?
I think you can do whatever you want in that first bar.
Yeah.
I think like I'll vary it on the repeat, and one time be completely lost, and another time you instantly.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Yeah. And other times.
Is it just to mark the beginning of the phrase? Do you think so? Like this is where it starts.
I think so. Yeah. I think.
Okay.
So. Yeah.
It just seems very random.
Yeah, but I suppose if you had to put one Kyle in that whole place, you might. That's probably where you'd.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but it's good. But then also, but that's the magic note as well, isn't it? That's where it changes. That's where suddenly we're back in our pixie land or whatever.
Yeah.
But interestingly, at 142, Lorena doesn't have a Kyle. So maybe that is going to be like, maybe we're expecting it more that time. Maybe we're sort of got the idea that, the tune's going to come again. Maybe it means it's all a bit less important. I mean, I like that narrative that the cello tune is the more important one. But then also for Lorena's one, maybe like the nature of the markings, and it's all the sort of shortness of it means that it is a bit more matter of fact, and that the background texture is more interesting that time. Yeah. I like, there's one tiny detail, but Toby, it's quite nice in 152 and 53. The 53 is a first inversion and 52 is the tonic. That's a nice way to think about launching the crescendo.
Yeah.
It's a tiny little thing, but so if because you really need to look at every single note. Or maybe that's, Yeah, off this crotchet in the second subject rarely has a dot, if ever has a dot on it. So maybe it's nice that that has a slightly different flavour, so it's not da da bum dum bum ba dum bum, but dee dum pa yum bum ba dum pa bum bum. But those are the moments where you have a tiny little bit, sort of as you're going over a little bump, just looking at the view, and then off we go again. And yeah, just really obsess over every single little bit of information that he gives us, because he's clearly wanting to give us a load of information. Right. Yeah, we got to 154. This is in the minor. The scale thing is in the minor. So we're having like little D major bits, and then we have the D minor drama of the scale. Always look at these ones, how far they go. The scales are always slightly different. And I think stroke wise, again, we've got all of our different little worlds that are going on, but don't forget your orchestral world, because I don't think all the time we want to hear this like really, really clear. I think often these things are just, again, like a wave of sound, and it doesn't, and like actually more sort of length on the string is quite nice for these scales. A question you will probably have, you might already have it, from 164 is how to pace these, the kind of fading out of it. It's sort of quite inconsistent, whether you phrase from the second quaver or from the beginning of the bars. And like later on, I think it's even a bit more confusing as well, because it doesn't. Yeah, in the second half, like for 13 and 14, the dynamics are clearly on the second quaver, but here they're on the first quaver. Like that's a bit odd. I personally wouldn't get too bogged down in how you do this end, because it is just like simple ending material. But I think it's quite nice to notice that there's like a dim or decrescendo, and then there's a subito pianissimo. Maybe that is something that is an interesting thing, but I don't think anyone's gonna like care whether you do this like from the first quaver, from the second quaver. Who knows? Maybe like his markings were a bit vague, and they just chose in this edition to put them there. Yeah, just in case you get bogged down by the discussion about that. Right. First time bar. I think it's quite nice, Toby, if we basically just fade away to pretty much nothing, and it can like rit a little bit if you want, or whatever you feel like. I think just sort of taking us back to a place where we can try again.
Sure.
Right, we've got 5 minutes left. So we've managed a half. That was probably more than I expected. But do you have any, like, I know you're not meeting this week, so it's not, but like just from what we've discussed so far, do you have any questions about that?
I've got a little question actually.
Yeah.
I think we're always wondering how to kind of develop our sound as a quartet. And I think we found that after we worked on Beethoven 132, like something changed. And we came back. I mean, it also may have been the first lockdown, something changed us inside. But we felt different. And yeah. I do also feel like probably after working on this piece, we're going to feel differently. But how do we kind of approach trying to find like this massive sound that we need for so much of this that isn't aggressive, but kind of is this kind of like Bruckner-esque kind of journey? How do you kind of work on that as a group?
That's a very, very good question. I think definitely this will change you. This piece is probably the piece that's changed our quartet life more than anything else. I think it really forces the resonance issue to be in the foreground, and the intensity of the blended sound. So often in quartet we're not wanting to blend, or it's like a common misconception that playing a string quartet is all about blending your sound. It was actually the opposite, I think, is true. But this does call for being masters of blend. But that's just matching and linking up resonance. And so that is going back to building it up from the bass, really not going about it trying to make volume, possibly altering the way you perceive volume. So when you feel like you're not playing loudly, you might then start to realize that you're still making a very potent sound, or a sound that is going to project massively. So learning more and more to trust that something that's not feeling like you're making a loud sound is actually having the opposite effect. Because that's such a hard thing for us as musicians to like trust that what feels one thing actually is coming out as another thing. And then allowing your communal effort to be the thing that is the priority, so that you're all making sounds into this magic machine that then projects that out into the auditorium and creates a very powerful effect. It's very hard because you also want to rehearse these things slowly, so therefore limiting the amount of bow that you have. But I think thinking about when you're working together, thinking about getting that resonance regardless of how much bow you're using. So if you're going from 33, if you're doing it under speed, you don't need to necessarily do it every time doing the bowing as you want to do. So actually it's just trying to like bathe yourselves in resonant sound. Doing a lot of pairs work, a lot of work, just two of you or three of you, and building that up. So you get addicted to that feeling of those like that fifth sound that we've spoken about, that just becomes like an automatic thing that you're craving. So the actual art of all of you, of the way you approach the string and the sound production with your bows, shifts through this piece. It should end up being something where it's just like this most glorious bath that is just drawing you into it to make that sound that's going to resonate. I mean, it's glorious work to do. And it will hurt your ears eventually. But yeah, I think that also comes into the matching stuff, even the little stuff like at the beginning, like I briefly mentioned, the bidim, all that kind of stuff. That you're really completely doing the same thing with your bow. Yeah, the nice thing about this piece is that the key it's in, it's really like constantly helping, and even when it gets a bit more sort of murky, that you still have that memory of making a beautiful G major sound. But a lot of it is and I think this more and more about just the actual nitty gritty of playing the cello or whatever instruments you're playing, is this skill of setting off a resonance and then releasing it straight away, so that once you've established a resonating sound, you don't need to do anything. So it's getting amazing at using like this tiny fraction of your bow, so you become such a good such a sort of great crafts person about how you manage creating the maximum effect with the least amount of space. So you can literally use a centimeter of bow to establish this sound that is just so resonant. And we can all do it if we try and use like half a bow to get a resonating sound, but it's to get really good at just using teeny bit of bow, and then your sound's going. And once your sound is going, that you can do whatever you want with it. But like that place at 33, it's fortissimo, but I will use that amount of bow to create the fortissimo, the impression of a fortissimo resonance that's then is there, and then you can ease off. You can like go and have a break. Like it's going, it's there, it's alive, and then you just use the rest of the bow to glorify that resonance and to like just give it a bit of an encouragement. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really helpful.
I mean, we can do loads of that work whenever we meet. Like, I don't know, April. Let's.
Oh, no, don't say
that. But that's that sort of thing. Yeah, but you can do that, a load of that with yourself. So like simple exercise, just take an open string and just get used to how, when that's sounding very open, how that feels and sounds, and then see if you can see how much, how little bow you can use to get that resonance. And you can just do it like, I don't know why I'm keeping sort of feeling at the point, but like maybe it's because this piece starts like that and 33 starts on, or we do at least on an up bow, but just getting that feeling of feeling the string and then just like get that resonance and then let it go. And you can do it yourselves, like start off with just tiny bit of bow and then whoosh through the bow. So you really get that feeling of like sending the sound up and up and up and up and up. Yeah. And then do that and have the same desire to whoosh the sound off, but then just hold your bow there. But don't worry about volume, just keep the resonance. And eventually you should be able to do a bow for, I don't know, 30 seconds, a minute, however long. Just one bow, but where the sound is just like absolutely just like buzzing with its joy of resonance. Yeah. And if you're all doing that, it's quite a cool thing to do all together. And that's what projection is. And that's what quality of sound is. And at the end of the day, none of us can be loud because we don't play instruments that are loud. You know, we gotta free ourselves from the idea that volume is something that it's about. Everything that we do is about levels of resonance, because that's what gives the impression of volume. You know, if you want something loud, you need to get amplified. You know, like, or you hear an orchestra. Like a quartet can't be loud, and that you hear so many string quartets like trying to just be loud, and it just sounds pathetic because it's just not going to be loud. And so they have no dynamic range. You know, people don't. You know, we've spoken about this. People don't play quietly. You know, but like it's all about the illusion of volume, and you do that through resonance and your extremes. And the one thing we can do better than anyone is play quietly. So we use that to establish what we can then, where we can grow from. Yeah.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can just next week. Let's just talk about a couple of other things in the development, maybe, and then let's just go to the second movement.
Great.
And yeah, awesome.
Sounds good.
Great,
Thank
John.
you.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you again hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.